Okay. Good morning, everyone, and or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are joining from the world. Since we're live streaming, I'm Shannon Miller, and I'm the director of the Office of Historic Preservation in San Antonio, Texas, in the United States, and I am also the co-chair for North America of the Climate Heritage Network. And I am very happy that you all have joined us today. To discuss loss and damage and culture and heritage. This is the fifth of 5 events that we have coordinated as part of the Arts, Culture, Antiquities, and Heritage track here at the Resilience Hub. And it has been a week of very interesting conversations, and we want to thank all of our partners who have helped put these really important events together this week. The term loss and damage broadly refers to the harm associated with adverse effects of climate change, particularly where adaptation is no longer an option. But what constitutes loss and damage is context-dependent and often requires place-based understanding of what people consider worth protecting. As a result, the connections between loss and damage and values, culture, and heritage are complex and too often missing from the larger loss and damage conversation. Culture and heritage, along with indigenous and local knowledge systems, already experiencing loss from slow and rapid onset hazards, but mounting harm from these lived experiences coupled with looming tipping points have made loss and damage one of the most critical issues in climate policy. Millions will face another dimension of loss, multifaceted challenges associated with climate-related migration and displacement. Policy priorities on this topic are for the Climate Heritage Network and our partners are to advocate for attention to the cultural dimensions of loss and damage in all of the relevant forums where these conversations are taking place. In this session, several of our colleagues will share their loss and damage journeys toward more holistic, cultural-rich, and community-activated solutions. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of our speakers this morning, and then we will begin once I've had the opportunity to do that. I would like to thank Julie Polanco, who unfortunately is not with us today, but she is with us virtually, and she's the one who really put in the legwork to organize this event and our other Resilience Hub events, so thank you, Julie. Julie is currently the California State Historic Preservation Officer. She oversees preservation laws, working in collaboration with tribal nations, adjacent communities, federal, state, and local agencies, and non-governmental organizations to steward cultural heritage and historic resources. She's dedicated to helping ensure that our stories of all communities are present in the rich and beautiful mosaic of our shared history. Julie is a founding member of the Climate Heritage Network, a co-chair of the United Nations Race to Resilience culture effort, and a fellow at the Urban Land Institute's Sustainability Council. Queen Quet is the chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation. She's a published author, computer scientist, lecturer, mathematician, historian, columnist, preservationist, environmental justice advocate, environmentalist, and film consultant. She's the founder of the premier advocacy organization for the continuation of Gullah Geechee culture, the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition. Farhana Yamin is an internationally recognized environmental lawyer, climate change and development policy expert. She has advised leaders and ministers on UN climate negotiations for 30 years, representing small islands and developing countries and attending nearly every major climate summit since 1991. She's an associate fellow at Chatham House, senior advisor to System IQ, and a visiting professor at University of the Arts, London, and deputy chair of the Climate Vulnerable Forum Expert Advisory Group. She is currently the coordinator of the Climate Justice and Just Transition Donor Collaborative Project, which is a project bringing together some of the world's largest private philanthropies on an educational journey about how to tackle systemic inequalities through intersectional solutions. Dr. Hannah Fluck, who is also joining us virtually this morning, is an archaeologist with 2 decades experience of advising on the management of cultural heritage in the UK. a founding member and currently vice chair for Europe of the Climate Heritage Network. She has worked for the past 7 years on climate change and heritage policy and guidance as head of environmental strategy for Historic England. She was a contributing author to the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment and has collaborated on many research and policy initiatives around heritage management in the context of climate change. In June 2022, Hannah joined the National Trust, the largest conservation charity in Europe and the largest private landowner in the UK, where as senior national archaeologist, she is continuing to explore how cultural heritage can play a positive part in our responses to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And Nusrat Nashin is working at the International Center for Climate Change and Development as a program coordinator of the Loss and Damage program. Her research interest lies in loss and damage, climate negotiation, locally led adaptation, advocacy, and storytelling. Queen Quet?
Well, we today on islands, we did it, and Atlantic and things like that. This your time of day. You don't go on to the quick show. Cast with net and things like that. Or we enjoy long soup. Net have a breakfast and things like that. We go on a cast out. Like we not first need this year. Because someone could go on there for true. And wear it in and get what you need for Nampan. For all the family what they on. And things like that in the compound. Or the road. Things like that. But now, I need just dry net. I need battle. We roll out Jonah to. I get way out Jonah in quicker. I get leave it for Nampan. For that, you gotta cast them up like this here. Get them in the bucket. Go on Jonah. Everybody has some fun Nampan. But now, people are coming in. They see we still there and things like that. But then yet we. Now shiwi. Nothing like that. Brother was. Them come say, oh, they want Nampan thing what we Nampan. But then they not they're from where we be. Then they're coming from where Yona. I come to you. They crab and thing. Not there like before. All of this shit. Used to there in me marsh. And now the marsh up. Say, what is? Where him? People are say, we can't find him. And I say, cost so much and things like that. We say, but why? When they study about that, I said, the ocean. And they said, the ocean turning acid. We said, well, no, yampa that. Tall. And we go into the other some people that call scientists. Then I yet we. But they yet we the crack we teach them. They say, eh? So I have to study them. That study we. And then we overstand and say, they talk like this. So because they talk like this, when we speak in our native tongue, they say, oh, we don't understand. So then why is it that then when we speak like this, you still don't seem to grasp what we've said for decades, for centuries, that you shouldn't build in all these places that you're building on shorelines into our marsh, into our ocean, because we don't have the word sustainability in Gullah. We simply live it. We don't have a word called resiliency in Gullah. As many indigenous people here have said, we simply embody it. We live it in the sense of, yes, we continue to stand in spite of everything thrown at us. But most people have said we don't want to be defined as resilient because of disasters. And we definitely are not defined in the Gullah Geechee Nation by a word named loss or a word named damaged. So I found it very unimpressive to come to a global meeting and hear those words elevated instead of the words victorious, instead of the words that indicate that we survived, we thrived, that we continue to exist. Because do we not Or is it that you see us and you still don't hear us, like I said in Gullah? That even if you hear me, you don't understand me. Even when I speak, what you say is a global language. I might as well correct me, keep like this shit and think like that. I might as well just speak my native tongue. Because as a scientist who's a mathematician, I thought all over the world 1 + 1 = 2. And that meant that if the two of us could get together and we could agree on something, we would go ahead and get to work and we would get it done. But what we are saying is, there have been more than 1 + 1 gathering for over a decade, and they're not getting anything done. That's antithetical to my culture. We don't have the luxury to sit and discuss what's lost if we see that, as I said, the blue crabs are not in the marsh. The shrimps are not there when we go to cast our nets, and certain fish aren't, that instead we have to go way out into the ocean to get something that used to be on the shore, that we could gather without all of these cultural implements. We need to find out what's wrong. So that's why we started talking to the scientists, talking to the global community, and having to learn their languages. But more often than not, we don't get a vote in the way that they define us. And I think that's unacceptable. In the US, they started using a term called BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And everybody I've met has said, who came up with that? We don't like it. None of us who you're categorizing that way would agree with that terminology. So I want to be clear, we don't want to be defined either by the words loss and damage. Why not simply call us who we be? Cultural heritage communities. And then let's dialogue about what we have done to continue our culture in spite of colonization, in spite of the capitalizing upon our culture by external groups, in spite of the environmental harm that has happened to our communities, homelands. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about what it is that we live that helps us to keep our cultural heritage thriving and surviving in spite of others looking at our places as a place to come in to damage and create loss. Because I've seen how people can articulate things and spin it around because their interpretation is not the same language. It's not the same culture. It's not the same tradition. So the word irreplaceable is critical in this discussion we're going to have today. Because if we don't have the cultures that we represent, the world, number one, becomes less colorful, as they like to say, number one. Less exciting, less vibrant. And if there's no vibrant, there's a song called A Vibrant Thing, A Vibrant Thing. If there's no vibrancy, there's probably not much life left. So if we want Mother Earth to thrive and survive and have a vibrant heartbeat, we need to rethink where we build. We need to rethink who determines where we build and what's in our scientific circles. And we need to learn to speak more languages of the world, including Gullah Geechee, and including the languages of my sisters who are going to join me up here today. That we want to create a circle where we all come together, where we can sit together, where we can share what our cultures are all about and what is happening and the impacts that we have in all these communities. And maybe at the end of it, you'll see why this is irreplaceable, that we are irreplaceable, and why cultural heritage is valuable. And that's where the investments need to be made. That's where the conversations need to be centered. And if we're going to be cops, we need to arrest those who continue to cause losses and damages and put them to the side and center those who thrive, survive, in spite of all that's been done. Thank you so much.
Hello, hi, good morning everyone. So that'll be hard to match that. Anyway, so I'll just try as the best as I can. So hello everyone, my name is Nusrat Noshin. I'm currently working at the International Center for Climate Change and Development. It's based in Bangladesh. And we are currently focusing all of our attention and resources into the new pot of honey, that is loss and damage. So basically, actually our director, Dr. Salimul Haq, has been advocating for this ever since, I think, the beginning of everything, the COP itself. So, I am very young to be, joining the forces, but I'm glad that I have. And it's a struggle, but we have a long time, a long fight to go on with. So from our center, we are focusing a lot of our research on one of the aspects that has been overshadowed on, which is the non-economic aspects of loss and damage. So one of the researches that we're doing is based in Bangladesh, in the southern coastal area. It's called in the Gabura and Burigwalini regions. These are two separate villages where we are conducting a study on the gendered aspects of non-economic losses and damages. So, for example, like earlier when we did a number of KIIs and FGDs, we know the most important part of those research are talking to people and getting to know their stories. So, when we're talking to people, we can see the vulnerabilities they actually face on the ground. And, that the coastal regions in Bangladesh they face perpetual impacts of both slow onset and rapid onset events, and the nature of the events that take place on, it makes it very difficult for them to adapt or cope up with anything. So even if they have the means or the resources or anything, it's extremely difficult to cope up with everything, given the nature of the events that happen. In fact, last month, we actually had a cyclone. It was called Cyclone Sitrang, which even though there were not a lot of loss of lives, because Bangladesh is currently, it's very good early warning systems and, cyclone shelters and everything, but still there are longer lasting impacts over which it's difficult, and the longer lasting impacts are the ones which are often ignored. They're not taken into account because all the media, everyone focuses on what the damages in infrastructure are, how many lives were lost and everything, but then what about I'll just cite a few examples from our study that in those areas, because of the increasing flooding and cyclones, there is a very intensive saltwater intrusion in those areas, which are having havoc over throughout all the communities, particularly over the women and small children. They're facing the brutal impacts of it. For example, continuous use of saline water is having physical impacts on them. They're having loss of hair. Their pigmentation is getting increasing, which is causing them skin issues. And then women are facing gynecological issues because of they're bathing with salt water, and it's having a lot of impacts on small children, and that's affecting their lives as we speak. And then we also come across a number of cultural issues, actually. In fact, they're very interesting because for example, in the Hindu communities in those regions, they have this religious custom called puja, and there they use a lot of flowers, and they hold cattle, cows as their gods. But there's loss of livestock during those sessions, and then because of the saltwater intrusion, the soil fertility has decreased by there's no tomorrow, so they cannot enjoy those festivals the way they would want. There's no flowers there. There's loss of mobility there because of the damages that are there. So it's and also another interesting thing that came up in the study is that people often don't want to marry their daughter off into a disaster-prone area because they're like, there's no life security of my daughter. So, these are some of the impacts we normally don't think of. And, suppose place is hit by a disaster, and then there is the immediate relief phase that happens. But what happens after 1 or 2 months, and those things affect them mentally. For example, because of the damages that happened, there were no toilets available, so they had to use makeshift toilets, and that was actually unsafe for the women there, because they often faced sexual violence, because it's in open air, so it's often these things nobody takes them into account. But how do you quantify that? That's another challenge that, even in the study, it's a qualitative study, but we're struggling to, how to count them into the equation. So I think that's one of the recommendations, that we should really work more towards how innovative ways as to how we can, count them into the equation itself. And also, the most important part of any of the losses and damages is that all of these impacts, they're either borne by the local communities or the local governments. But they don't have, they're already vulnerable. They're continuously being faced by, cascading crisis, but despite that, they are not getting enough at scale. Nothing is at scale. No finance is at scale. So that is where we need to step up and work towards helping them towards a more sustainable future. That's all from me. Thank you.
And next we'll hear from Hannah Fluck, who's virtual.
Hello, it's so good to see so many familiar faces in the room now. I really wish I was there with you, but I'm in a very rainy, dark morning in England, so very much feeling the impacts of the climate changes that are affecting our country at the moment. I wanted to talk to you today about some work that I've been involved with colleagues from the National Trust and Historic England and the University of Exeter, where we were faced with the conundrum of what do you do once you've accepted that you are facing loss of heritage. In England, we have words that we use to talk about our archaeological heritage and our cultural heritage as irreplaceable. Queen Quet's already used that term. It's an irreplaceable resource. And for those of us whose jobs it is to try and look after this heritage, to even contemplate talking about loss feels like a failure. And that's something that's been a huge challenge for the sector, and for particularly for an organisation like mine, the National Trust, whose motto is for everyone, forever. So how on earth do you start to find constructive ways through how we can handle, how we can engage with, and how we can work with looking after places where we will be losing huge elements of what makes those places special. So we began tackling this idea of how we might reframe or rethink loss to even look at that very language. Again, Queen Quet, thank you for bringing up language. It's incredibly important, the words that we use to describe things and to communicate with each other. And we realized that actually a lot of the ways in which we were talking about loss and these places just weren't adequate to try and find positive ways through how we can support the transformation of places in ways that are still valuable for people and still realize that heritage and natural value of these places. So we decided to bring together researchers, practitioners, regulators, and those working with the expertise to look after these places, to understand how they were viewing loss, what they were thinking about how they might address these issues. And we discovered that actually, for the most part, people aren't. We desperately try and avoid thinking about these things that are hard. And that in itself is a problem. So we decided to develop a framework that would really help us use different language, frame things positively, so that we could start to be active, play a more active role in the management of these places, not just passive observers as our heritage is lost. So we developed a concept with funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council in England, through a project led by Professor Caitlin De Silvi at Exeter University. We developed the concept of adaptive release. And this was an idea that actually what we are doing as managers of the places, as custodians of the heritage, for places where we're losing heritage, is actually overseeing a process of transformation, which we can either choose to observe passively or we can get involved with. And through getting involved with and engaging with, release different values, different understanding, and different relationships with those places as those places change. More importantly, we might not even know what the end result will be. We don't know what these places will be like in the future. So we are dealing with levels of uncertainty, which are really disconcerting for people. It's a very uncomfortable space to work in. In fact, I often say if you're feeling comfortable about the decisions that we have to make, then you probably haven't properly understood the problems. So adaptive release is about recognizing that these places have different values to different people. They have natural value, cultural value. Now, and I appreciate that that's not a distinction that is made in most of the world, but in England, it's very ingrained in our laws. And actually that process of transformation is about how we can realize and support a better transition to enable those places to be valuable for people as cultural places, but also for nature. So in particular, we were exploring places along the coast where they might be moving from being places that are on land to places that are in the sea. And as those structures are lost, are damaged by the actions of the sea, they become features in our foreshore. And one of the questions that we were asking is it possible to do things to help that process that mean that they can then become habitat for the creatures that live in the foreshore, another habitat that is hugely affected by climate change. We're at the very early stages of this process. It took a long time, I think, for us to accept and get our heads around this really tricky area. We have a framework. There's some links, I believe, in the chat that are defining and setting out the thinking that led us to this adaptive release concept. And we're now in the process of trying to apply it. It is not easy. It's really hard, even for those of us that have lived with this concept and been part of thinking it up. And I think recognizing how hard some of this is a very important part of bringing people with us as we try and find positive solutions. I also wanted to just talk briefly about work of a PhD student that I have with Caitlin De Silva at Exeter University. Her name's Tanya Bencher. She's coming to the end of a really innovative piece of research, also looking at loss, but asking that question more about whose values are they that we want to consider within this process? Whose values are they when it comes to thinking about our heritage assets? Whose heritage? And which of those voices matter more as we're trying to understand the transformation of these places? And she's developed a very creative approach using interactive documentary to try and capture those different voices, not to offer one as being more important than the other, but to enable people interacting with that interactive documentary to navigate their own way through the stories of those places and those people. And we're, again, very early stages of thinking about how this might apply. But one of the things I can see is that offers a way for us to explore the different ways in which people, the communities, different communities of interest with these places, value and engage with those places which are undergoing this transformation, enabling us to think through different possible futures and how we might support that transformation in a positive way. In many ways, it's adaptation in action for ourselves, not just for these physical places that we're looking after. So hopefully there's a link. Tanya's interactive documentary is live as a draft. She's really looking for people to comment and fill in a questionnaire about what they think about it, so she can revise and review that as part of her PhD research. And we're really looking forward to being able to apply that research in the future to more of our places. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Farhana Yamin. I'm a lawyer who's participated in these negotiations for 30 years, mainly advising small island states, Pacific countries in particular. The Marshall Islands I worked for about 5 years in the run-up to Paris, and Samoa and many of the countries. You have the Pacific Pavilion right there, so please go and visit. I'm just going to say a few words also about my own culture and my own identity. I'm also a Muslim. I'm a migrant. I moved with my family when I was 9 from Pakistan to the UK. And so I sort of feel like sometimes our lived experience, we don't talk about it very much. And it's really, really important. And in fact, it's probably one of the key reasons why there's such an imbalance in terms of knowledge, our lived experience, the ways in which we embody culture, we embody values, is often undervalued, and more formal systems of knowledge are valued. And some people's formal knowledge is valued because of the bodies they're in. So by and large, for the last 400 years, we've had the knowledge, especially the formal knowledge and the scientific knowledge of a specific group of countries, predominantly white countries, that was valued very highly. And the knowledge, the traditions, the cultural heritage, the wisdom of other people, those who were essentially colonized for the last 400 years, was not valued. And actually, that's at the heart of the divide. The big divide is now countries that were colonized. I'm a diaspora member coming back to a country, and I feel, even after having lived in that country for more than nearly coming up to 50 years, I'm still triggered. I'm a member of the National Trust. When I go past and go into the stately homes and gardens, there are pictures of families whose wealth, whose histories were as a direct result of oppressing my ancestors. And that is what we need to sort of acknowledge. There's a set of histories that are intertwined, actually. Our histories are intertwined. But we're now coming to a point where the change that is happening, yet another set of changes as a result of climate, climate crisis, as a result of the ecological crisis, is forcing further cultural changes that are not welcome any more than the cultural changes that was forced on us, for the last 400 years. So change is different when you accept it. When my family moved to the UK, it was a voluntary choice, actually only for 3 years initially. We didn't realize what we were getting ourselves into. But the irreplaceable part is important, but so is who's forcing the change, who's causing the change, and who's being asked to accept it. And I rightly agree with your questioning. There are huge numbers of labels. When I came to the UK, I understood very quickly that actually I was black. And that is the label that was used in the UK. You're either white or you are black. And if you're Irish, Pakistani, whatever shade of brown you were black. That was a political label. And in the US, you have the people of color label, which I like much less. And most of our community don't really like it because it sort of racializes us. In a way, it makes it all about the amount of melatonin in your skin, as opposed to the racialization process that is happening. So I prefer, and in my own organization and work, use the term racialized minority or globalized majority, which is what I am. I feel that for me, race is a coat that I'm forced to wear by others. I don't want to wear it. I didn't choose to wear it. It's a process that happens to me. And I guess I'm saying these things because I think what gives me hope here is that a new set of stories is emerging, which is at last we're able to talk about this cycle that was unleashed, and we're uncovering and able to talk about that. It's not that it's not difficult. The National Trust is finding it very difficult. There's a huge reaction, by the dominant cultures, as it were, of not wanting to acknowledge, of not wanting to accept the discomfort that comes with acknowledging that the wealth, the resources, the privileges that are attached have come from this history. And we must acknowledge that is a loss that is being mourned by many, and that is giving rise to a very hostile set of conditions, culture wars as they're called. The culture wars are here. So I wanted to say a little bit about that, because I feel like the bigger political context you're seeing in many countries, actually culture wars against a set of people that want to acknowledge, heal, come together, recognize and move on from their past, recognize the damage, the hurt, the irreplaceable loss that happened and is continuing to happen, and others who would rather not go there, cannot go there for their own discomforts. Let me just turn to my professional work has been almost entirely with small nations, sometimes smaller than the London borough that I live in. My London borough, Camden, is 260,000 people, and many of the island countries that I work for are smaller than that in population terms. The Marshall Islands is about 70,000 people. In fact, more Marshallese live in the US than live in the Marshall Islands. But that's a choice that has resulted from a complex set of factors to do with globalization, to do with loss of economic opportunities, to do with cultural changes that are happening. But now, I think they are facing something very different, because their cultural heritage, which is tied, meter by meter, kilometer by kilometer, every bit is different, every atoll is different, everything is not the same in one of the 27 atoll, parts from the other, is being really shifting and eroding as a result of changes they did not accept or want. Cemeteries being washed away. If yours is a culture that really is rooted in your ancestors, and it's a weekly ritual to go to your cemetery and it's washed away, well, that is a huge loss. And we cannot quantify these kinds of losses. The physical, the biophysical aspects of losing your home, losing your field, losing your livelihood, that is tragic enough. But actually people losing their sense of belonging, losing who they are, losing their contact with their ancestors, that is really, really difficult. And that I've experienced that firsthand as a child growing up, never having, a grave to go to in my country of my ancestors, my knowledge, my traditions. We've kept those up, but it's very difficult to do that in a different place. I think what is also giving me huge hope is the fact that at this COP, really for the first time, these cultural dimensions are really at the forefront. And I give, really full praise and credit to so many people, the Climate Heritage Network, the Resilience Hub here, Julie's Bicycle, which I'm a trustee of. So thank you for doing all of this amazing work that is, it's not just about the pennies and the pounds and, physical assets. This is about a set of changes that are profoundly affecting who we are. And finally, just to say also, in huge recognition, what you said, I don't see my culture as broken. I don't see it as, focusing on the negative. My culture, my ancestors, my mum and dad, who sadly passed away, they were children when the partition happened. They were alive. They fought against imperialism. They fought against colonialism. They are the direct product of a set of huge histories that overthrew systems more toxic than the current form of capitalism that we find. So I'm deeply proud of that. I'm deeply proud of having been part of the anti-apartheid movement, of being part of the feminist movement, of being part of these huge set of changes where the right values, in my view, and I say this in a deep way, values that are based on equality, dignity, human rights of all, are now coming to the forefront, and culture is an absolutely key part of that. That is one of the fundamental human rights, is the right to enjoy our culture. And that is what I want to end on and say thank you, and please keep going. Salim is not in the room today, but he and I go back a long way. I think he has been to every COP. I missed 2 because I had 4 babies along the way. So he started at one point an adaptation day in the middle of the COP, because all of the people who did adaptation didn't have an agenda item. didn't have a space to discuss adaptation. And we're a long way from that. I think that was about 20 years ago. And I feel actually culture has arrived in a big way. So over the weekend that just went, we had Culture Cop over 3 days, a whole set of dialogues, discussions, which Queen Quet was very much a part of, a Culture Cop assembly that we repeated a number of times. So I think here we are at the cusp of saying climate change is not just about the energy sector. It's not just about emissions from transport. It's not just about land use. It is deeply about all of those things intertwined with culture. And I think I will end it there, but say thank you to everyone, to all of us, and let's continue and deepen and enrich the way in which the conversations here happen. It's not just some technocratic choices that, I'm sorry, the cost curves people, give to us and we accept. It's about the choices that we make and the lives that we want to live. And I think in the face of the ecological changes that are happening, and they are changes, nature may be becoming more unkind in terms of the severity and the impacts that we may have to face, but our societies are capable of being more kind, of being compassion-led, of being human rights-led, and those are the values I feel that the ancient cultures had in abundance, and we can actually move forward to. So some of it is also about questioning and letting go some of the toxic cultures that we have in favor of more inclusive, rights-respecting, more tolerant, and cultures that are based on a set of relationships that value abundance and an ability to share in that. So thank you.
Thanks to all of you. I'm now going to invite Julie, who is joining us virtually. I'm gonna let her kick off the discussion.
Wow. Thank you all so much for your amazing insight and for your sharing and for being present today. This is the culmination of a long 2 weeks that have been prepared for many, many months to be sure that the voices of frontline vulnerable communities are present and are heard in the climate change conversation. So thank you all for the work that you do every day. I don't see any questions, Shannon, from the live chat. So perhaps we can start maybe by asking our speakers, some questions. We talked about, there was a lot of conversation about loss and damage and the disproportionate effect on particularly women and children. A small number of countries, Belgium, Germany, Denmark, Scotland, have made funding commitments towards loss and damage. And this week we learned Australia has also pledged 50 million euros. I wonder, for the speakers, maybe we can ask everybody to answer the question, what do pacts like this look like? How do we think the funding would best support the needs of the most vulnerable? And what can we do as cultural actors to ensure that those changes and those needs are being met? So maybe Farhana, if we can start with you.
Well, I guess in my professional work, I've been grounded by a very simple insight is who's at the table gets to decide what happens. So changing who's at the table is an important and a very key part of bringing the voices of others who have been marginalized, disenfranchised, diminished in terms of the importance that we give. And I feel that the new fund that might be established must give priority to those who are facing immediate choices, which are really quite tragic, quite profound. And many of those are the small atoll nations, actually, the Kiribati, the Marshall Islands, the Maldives. These are all places with less than a meter of sea rise, and they are being devastated right now. So we need to ask them first and foremost, what are the responses that they would like to take? And in nearly all those cases, I can tell you, they don't want to be given they don't want to be told what to do, that they have to move or migrate or something else. It's a much more complex set of choices. And so I think we should prioritize and ask them and be people-led first and foremost. But the truth is that there are entire countries. Bangladesh is basically 80 small atolls all joined up in a river system. So it's really a collection of almost islands in itself. And larger countries like the Philippines, Nigeria, these are huge countries with very large populations. Pakistan, which you've seen, over 220 million people. These are now very large numbers of people, and we have to then come at very quickly at scale. And it's not just about 5 or 10 countries anymore. It's about everyone. And I think that is happening right now. So we have to keep going. And those in the cultural sector, as in every other sector, must give a higher share of voice and platform those. So I think that would be my simple, quick metric. Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. I ditto everything you said, and I will add to it. In regard to the Gullah Geechee Nation, we are literally in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, as you said, we are also in a hurricane zone. So we are constantly faced with the same things, where the news cycle runs during the hurricane season. If a storm is coming at you, hits you, kills someone, so on and so forth. Mostly discussions of real estate from the external perspective. We started the Greening Gullah Geechee Communities Project. We have been working with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We've worked with them for decades. But first, they brought us in as an environmental justice community, because that was the only category that it seemed to fit, and the only agency that could see how they could bring resources to the table to work with a black community was them, because they had a whole group of people that were environmental justice advocates. Why are they environmental justice advocates? Because in most of the communities, there's a cancer alley. There is repeated harm and damage, or loss and damage from hurricanes. But as you said, they don't then come to the community and ask us, what projects are you working on to help sustain your community? Instead, someone in DC or someone in some office, in a state office, says, oh, well, maybe we should just buy them out. Why do you want to buy us out instead of buying out the people who brought what I call the destructionment to us? Buy out those people who are putting gated areas that block the indigenous from getting in, and then build into the coastline in ways that as they called us, emotional natives, said they shouldn't have done. Buy them out. Let's do the restoration that Greening Gullah Geechee Communities says can happen with our South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative we're working on to restore and protect 1 million acres of salt marsh, to work specifically in ocean-based and nature-based solutions. We've said this for eons. So now it's a matter of investment directly with those communities on the ground, as opposed to saying the only way to get an investment is form a nonprofit organization, then be a part of a pool of another set of nonprofits competing to get funding. Come directly to those communities, because you know who we are, because you document us in the news cycle when we get hit with something. So you know we're there. Come and invest directly in what the community says. We already have a plan, we're working on it, and we're doing millions of dollars of work with hundreds of dollars. Bring the millions of dollars. We already have the vision, we have the plan, and we do have the expertise. That is part of culture. Intellect is part of culture. People tend to think we're just artists and we're performers. We're not just performers, but we are performing a task that we only need the world to help us complete.
So I'll echo with the previous two speakers, of course. So I don't see, loss and damage and a locally led adaptation as separate things. They're two parts of the same coin, right? So one is the impacts that we're facing, another is a solution, right? So I mean, so far everything has been top down, but it's clear we say the words, but we don't act upon it. We say that everything's top down. We should lead from the people, but nobody does that. So what is required is, in good faith, you should start investing in people and communities. Of course, as you said, that there are many grassroots organizations. We recently worked with this organization in the Philippines. So they have been working with grassroots communities for a long time. They are the grassroots communities. So they have they just don't have the resources. They have the skill, they have the intellect, they have everything that is required. They know what is required on the ground and what are the solutions that is feasible, but they just need the money. They are using their own fund as much as they have, but all they need is just some external funding so that they can make the efforts up to scale. So that's all that's required, that in good faith, in goodwill, because everything, anytime funding arrangements are mentioned, there comes from the global north and MDBs and everything, that accountability and transparency. Come on, I mean, you should just in good faith, you should you see and test it out. If it does reach the local communities, that's all you need. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Shannon, do you want to add, and Hannah?
Hannah, if
You want me to pick up on that? It's a hard act to follow with these three amazing ladies, but I can only speak to the work that we've been doing with the physical heritage in the UK. But actually, that idea of actually asking people and listening is incredibly important. Really hard, and I think it's essential for the decisions that we make going forward. Finding ways to do that, to recognise the complexity, and certainly in our experience, the fact that the answers that you get back are not necessarily going to be in agreement. There are very different perspectives about what people value and people want from places and from our heritage, certainly in the UK, and how we navigate that is not easy. But the answer lies in that communication, that asking and listening, and co-creating those solutions and responses, which I think echoes what the previous speakers have said. So we can't impose solutions from outside positions, whether that's within nations or internationally. And we really have to be listening and co-creating, collaborating on these solutions.
Thank you. I agree, and I think we've heard in other sessions that we've put together in the Resilience Hub this idea that we're also working on in California, about how we include and elevate culture and climate vulnerability index assessments and these types of processes that are known in the environmental world, but really miss the mark on Indigenous and adjacent communities and culture and the voices of the people who have been stewarding these places in many different ways for decades and centuries. And so how do we do that in a real way that also changes the power shift dynamic from the landowner being the primary voice to really understanding, especially when it's a governmentally owned piece of land, a state park or a forest, for example, how do we make sure that all community values are present in the conversation of understanding vulnerability and risk to those sites, so that when decisions are being made, the trade-offs that might need to happen are there. The people who are being most affected are participatory in the decision making, and also in then the long-term stewardship of places. And I think it's an issue that we all face, whether we're in the Philippines or in the United States. And how do we really stop talking from these towers of government and capitals and really begin to talk from the ground up and understand those very important voices? And I'm so hopeful with the work that everybody's doing together and independently, and this opportunity to share our knowledge for greater and faster responses, that we will be able to change those dynamics in ways that see a more just response to the needs of communities today as well as into the future. Shannon, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think we're about out of time. We just have a couple minutes left, and we have the cartoonist to show off his work, correct?
Yep. Yes, Rohan, are you with us? And would you like to introduce yourself and show us your beautiful work that you've created for us today?
Oh, he's actually not with us. So, well, thank you, everyone. This has been an excellent conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Julie, Hannah, thank you for joining virtually. We missed having you with us in the room. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you to the organisers. And if you're in the Blue Zone, then there's a first ever ministerial meeting in the Egypt Pavilion today at 3 p.m. till 4 p.m. Very easy to find straight as you come in. Very nice place to hang out. So hopefully see many of you there. And thank you again to all of the organisers for that. And let's go out on a high and see if we can build on all of the different cultural workers, organizations, networks that have come together and really changed the narrative, the stories, and who tells them, because that's what's important. Thanks.